The battlefield was quiet now, but the silence only made it feel more dangerous. Smoke rose from the ruins of destroyed ships and craters left by powerful blasts. The war was over, but for many, it didn't feel like it. The soldiers who survived the fighting were left to pick up the pieces, and in this alien world, no one knew what would happen next. Naira sat on the cold ground, hidden in the shadows of an old, broken structure. Her skin was bruised, her clothes torn, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She could hear the distant footsteps of her own people, but none of them came to help. They had abandoned her. She was no longer part of their mission. They had left her behind when the battle turned against them, and Naira knew that she had no place with them anymore. She wasn't just another soldier to them. She was a failure, a traitor. She clutched her arm, where a deep gash had torn through her skin. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten or slept. The hunger gnawed at her, but the pain of being left behind was worse. Her people, her own kind, had made it clear they were done with her. In the distance, the sound of boots crunching on gravel caught her attention. She looked up quickly, hoping it was someone she could trust. But it wasn't. It was a human soldier, part of a cleanup team sent to secure the area. She watched him move cautiously toward the wreckage, his gun ready, his eyes alert. She knew he had no reason to care about her. After all, humans were enemies of her people. The soldier's name was Liam. He was tall, his face weathered by battle, but there was a calmness in his movements that suggested he had seen far too many wars to be shaken by this one. His squad had been tasked with securing the area and making sure there were no more threats. The last thing he expected to find in this desolate place was an injured alien girl. Liam paused when he saw Naira, her figure barely visible in the shadows. His squad mates were talking among themselves, but Liam's eyes locked onto her. He could tell she was hurt, but it was more than that. She looked different, vulnerable. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else too, something he couldn't quite explain. "Hey, you," Liam called out, his voice low but firm. Naira flinched, her heart pounding. She knew she should run. She knew he could be dangerous. But for some reason, she didn't move. Maybe it was because she was too weak, or maybe it was because, for the first time in days, someone had noticed her. Liam stepped closer, his weapon lowered. "Are you all right?" The words felt strange. No one had asked her that in a long time. No one cared enough to ask. Yet here he was, a human, offering her help. I'm not your enemy," Naira whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't know why she said it. Perhaps it was the pain talking, or the loneliness. But in that moment, she hoped Liam would understand. Liam looked at her, still unsure of what to do. He had been trained to trust his instincts, but this situation was different. His instincts told him to leave her. But there was something about Naira's eyes that made him hesitate. "Let's get you out of here," he said, finally deciding. For the first time in a long while, Naira felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone had abandoned her. Naira had always been taught to be cautious, especially when dealing with humans. Her people saw them as nothing more than enemies, weak, unpredictable, and often dangerous. Yet, as Liam helped her onto her feet, she found herself questioning everything she had been told. Her body ached, and every movement felt like it took all of her strength. She was still unsure if she could trust him, but the fact that he hadn't attacked her yet surprised her. The human soldier didn't seem afraid, even though he must have known she was from a race that his people had fought against for years. Liam looked at her with concern, his brow furrowing as he studied the wounds on her body. "You're hurt pretty bad," he said, his voice softening. "We need to get you somewhere safe." Naira tried to speak, but the words didn't come easily. She had never imagined that a human would ever care enough to help her. The idea felt foreign, like a dream she couldn't wake up from. "Why? Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Liam paused. He didn't have an easy answer to that question. It wasn't just because she was hurt, or because it was his duty as a soldier. It was something deeper, something that had drawn him to her since the moment he saw her. Despite everything he knew about the war, about the tensions between their people, there was something about Naira that made him want to protect her. It was a feeling he couldn't explain. "I don't know," Liam admitted, glancing at the ground. "I guess I just couldn't leave you here, alone. No one deserves that." Naira studied him closely. She had heard many stories about humans, how they could be ruthless and merciless. But in Liam's eyes, she saw none of that. There was something genuine about him, something that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the others. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small flicker of hope. "I don't trust you," Naira said bluntly, her voice low. "But I don't have anywhere else to go." Liam nodded slowly. "I get it, but I'm not asking you to trust me right now. I'm just here to help." He extended his hand to her, offering support. She hesitated for a moment, but then took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against her cold skin. They moved carefully through the wreckage, Liam keeping a close eye on their surroundings. Naira's mind raced. She couldn't ignore the danger. She had seen how quickly humans could turn on each other, and now she was relying on one of them for her safety. The thought scared her, but at the same time, it was comforting. "I'll stick with you until we find a safe place," Liam said as they walked, his voice steady. "I don't care if you're alien or human. Everyone deserves a chance." Naira couldn't help but stare at him. His words felt strange, but in a way they gave her a small sense of peace. She had never met anyone who spoke like that before. As they continued through the desolate landscape, Naira found herself wondering if this human soldier, this stranger, might actually be her only hope. But even though she felt a growing sense of trust, a part of her still warned her not to get too close. She had been betrayed before. She wouldn't let it happen again. But for now, she had no choice but to follow him. The days passed in a blur of constant movement. Liam and Naira traveled in silence most of the time, always on alert, always looking over their shoulders. The harsh landscape of the war-torn planet offered little shelter, but Liam had managed to find a few safe places for them to rest along the way. Still, Naira's wounds made it hard to keep up, and her body grew weaker with each passing hour. Naira often wondered if this was all just a cruel joke. Why was Liam helping her? Why was he risking his life for someone like her, someone who had been abandoned by her own people? In her mind, it didn't make sense. She had always been taught that humans were selfish, merciless creatures, focused only on their own survival. Yet here was Liam, standing beside her, doing everything in his power to keep her alive. But even as she fought to trust him, Naira couldn't ignore the doubts that crept into her mind. She had been betrayed before. She had trusted her own kind, only to be cast aside like a broken tool. What if Liam was just like the others? What if at the end of this journey, he would leave her when she needed him the most? Meanwhile, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every day, he received new orders from his superiors, and every day, they became more and more disconnected from what he believed was right. His squad was eager to finish the mission and return to the safety of their own people, but Liam wasn't like the rest of them. He couldn't just leave Naira behind. But the constant pressure from his commanding officers was taking a toll. One evening, as they sat in a small hidden shelter, Liam received an encrypted message from his superior. His face grew tight with frustration as he read the message, and Naira noticed the change in his demeanor. "We've been ordered to abandon the mission," Liam said, his voice low and hard. "We're supposed to leave the area and return to base immediately." Naira's heart sank. She had heard stories of soldiers abandoning their posts, but she hadn't thought it would happen to her. She had trusted Liam, but now she wasn't sure. "Leave." Naira's voice cracked as she turned toward him. "So, you're going to leave me?" Liam hesitated, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He knew what the right thing to do was, but the weight of his orders pressed down on him. "You don't understand," Liam said, his voice strained. I don't have a choice. My squad is counting on me to follow orders." Naira's eyes filled with anger, but more than that, there was a deep pain. She had been abandoned before, by her own people. She had trusted them, and they had thrown her away. Now Liam was telling her the same thing. "I'm not one of your missions, Liam," she said coldly, her voice shaking with emotion. "I'm not some casualty you can leave behind when it gets too hard." Liam's face softened, guilt flooding through him. "I'm not leaving you," he said quickly. I don't know what to do anymore." But Naira didn't hear him. The doubt that had been building in her heart finally took root, and in that moment, she realized something. Maybe humans weren't so different after all. The tension between Liam and Naira lingered in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Though Liam had promised not to abandon her, Naira couldn't shake the fear that his loyalty to his people would win out in the end. She had been betrayed before, and she feared the same thing would happen again. The weight of the uncertainty felt like a heavy stone in her chest. Liam, for his part, couldn't stop thinking about the message he had received. His squad was already making plans to leave, and the pressure from his superiors to return was overwhelming. But he couldn't do it. Not after everything he had promised Naira. Yet, even as his resolve held firm, he could sense that their journey was about to take a dangerous turn. The wind howled outside their makeshift shelter as the night grew colder. Liam sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, while Naira rested against the wall, her eyes closed, but her mind racing. Suddenly, she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps in the distance. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then the noise grew louder, closer. Liam's hand immediately shot to his weapon. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. Naira's heart began to race as she understood the gravity of the situation. Her people weren't the only ones out there. She had heard stories of merciless bounty hunters who roamed the galaxy, hunting down those who were considered expendable by their own kind. She had hoped to escape them, but it seemed that fate had other plans. The footsteps grew louder, and then suddenly, they stopped. Liam and Naira held their breath, listening. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever before the sound of movement came again, this time closer and more deliberate. "They're here," Naira whispered, her voice trembling. Liam's eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows outside. "Get ready," he murmured. "We're not going down without a fight." Before Naira could react, the door to their shelter burst open. Standing in the doorway were two tall, armored figures, their eyes glowing with a cold alien light. They were dressed in black combat gear, their faces hidden behind helmets. The sight of them sent a chill through Naira's bones. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were the hunters, merciless bounty hunters sent to track her down. "You're the one they've been looking for," one of the hunters said, his voice mechanical and emotionless. "Come with us, or we'll make you regret it." Naira's pulse quickened. She had been caught before, but never like this. She had no idea how Liam would react, but she could see the determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. "Stay behind me," Liam said, stepping in front of her. "I'll handle this." Naira's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she almost couldn't believe it. The human soldier, the one who had been her only hope, was actually going to protect her. He wasn't leaving her behind. The bounty hunters exchanged a glance, then raised their weapons. The air was thick with tension, and Naira's heart raced. She wasn't sure if they would make it out alive, but for the first time since she had been abandoned, she felt a small spark of hope. The bounty hunters didn't waste any time. Their weapons were aimed directly at Liam and Naira, their cold eyes unblinking behind their helmets. The tension in the air was thick, and every second felt like an eternity. Naira's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen behind Liam, unsure of what would happen next. "Move aside, human," one of the bounty hunters commanded, his voice as cold as the steel of his armor. "The alien is coming with us." Liam's grip tightened on his weapon, and his face remained unreadable. He knew he was outnumbered and outgunned, but he wasn't about to back down. He had made a promise to Nara, and he intended to keep it. "I'm not letting you take her," Liam said, his voice steady. "You'll have to go through me first." The bounty hunters didn't flinch. They were trained for moments like this, their movements calculated and precise. They had hunted down countless beings across the galaxy, and a human soldier was no different. "We don't have time for this," the second bounty hunter said. "Move, or we'll make you move." Liam's mind raced. He had fought in many battles, but this was different. He wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was protecting Naira, someone who had no one left but him. His eyes darted quickly over the shelter, looking for anything that could give him an advantage. There was nothing. They were trapped. But then, just as the hunters were about to take a step forward, a sudden loud sound echoed from the distance, like the roar of a beast. The bounty hunters paused, their heads turning toward the source of the noise. Liam's heart skipped a beat. He could tell that the sound wasn't just an animal. It was something much bigger. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances. What was that? One of them muttered, clearly on edge. Before anyone could react, a huge shadow loomed over them. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. Out of nowhere, a massive creature emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing bright yellow, its body covered in thick, armored scales. The creature towered over the bounty hunters, its growl sending chills down their spines. The hunters raised their weapons instinctively, but it was clear that they were no match for the beast. The creature roared, and the bounty hunters took a step back, clearly afraid. "This isn't what we signed up for," one of them said, his voice shaky. Liam took advantage of the confusion. "Get down," he shouted to Nara, pulling her out of the line of fire as the creature lunged forward, attacking the hunters with terrifying speed. The battle was chaotic. The creature ripped through the bounty hunter's armor like paper, its claws slashing through the air. Liam and Nara scrambled to the side, taking cover behind a pile of debris. Naira's eyes were wide with shock as she watched the creature destroy their enemies. "I didn't know such creatures existed," Naira said, her voice trembling. Liam nodded, still in disbelief. "Neither did I." As the last of the bounty hunters fell, the creature turned toward them, its massive head swiveling in their direction. Naira instinctively took a step back, but Liam stood still, staring at the beast. There was no telling if the creature would attack them next. But instead of attacking, the creature lowered its head, sniffing the air. It let out a low growl, then slowly backed away, disappearing into the darkness from which it had emerged. The silence that followed was deafening. Liam and Nara stood frozen, still trying to process what had just happened. "Well, that was unexpected," Liam said, his voice filled with awe. Nara glanced at him, a small, uncertain smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I think we just got saved by an alien." Liam chuckled softly, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Yeah, but I'm not sure I want to stick around to find out who or what that was." Nara nodded in agreement. "Let's get out of here while we still can." As they made their way through the wreckage, they realized something. They had just been saved by something. Someone more dangerous than their enemies. But for now, they had no choice but to move forward, uncertain of what the future held. Liam and Nara had barely managed to escape the creature's sudden appearance, but the danger hadn't passed. The night was still alive with the sounds of distant creatures and the unknown. Their flight through the wreckage had been swift, but both of them were exhausted. They needed rest, but there was no time to stop. They had narrowly avoided one death trap, and neither of them was willing to tempt fate by staying too long in the open. The air felt heavier now, the weight of their journey pressing down on both of them. Liam kept his eyes on the path ahead, alert for any sign of danger. Nara walked beside him, her steps slow, her strength faltering. Her wounds were starting to catch up to her, and she could feel herself growing weaker with every step. I don't think I can keep going much longer, Naira said, her voice quiet but filled with frustration. She wasn't used to showing weakness, but there was no hiding it now. The pain in her body was too much to ignore. Liam turned to her, concern flashing across his face. He could see how exhausted she was, but he couldn't afford to stop. They needed to keep moving, or they'd be caught. We can't stop yet, he said, his tone firm but gentle. We'll find a place to rest soon, just a little further. Naira nodded but didn't speak. She had no energy left to argue. She had been running on nothing but willpower, and now it was running out. She felt like a burden to Liam, someone he didn't need to be carrying. He had already sacrificed so much for her, and she hated feeling like she was holding him back. But as they moved forward, Naira couldn't ignore the gnawing guilt that was beginning to eat at her. She had been abandoned by everyone, her people, her allies, even her own planet. And now she was dragging Liam down with her. He had his own people, his own responsibilities. He should have left her behind long ago. But instead, he kept going, and every step they took together, Naira couldn't help but wonder why. She knew she wasn't the only one struggling. Liam had always seemed so strong, but she had seen the doubt in his eyes, the hesitation, the orders he had received, the pressure from his superiors. It was all starting to weigh on him. He had made a choice when he decided to stay with her, but now, with every step, that choice was costing him more. Liam, Naira said softly, finally breaking the silence. You don't have to keep going. I'm not worth this. You've already given up so much for me. Liam stopped in his tracks and turned to face her. His eyes softened, and for a moment, the hardness of his soldier's exterior melted away. I didn't do this for anyone else but you, he said, his voice low but clear. I don't care about the orders, or the mission, or what anyone else thinks. You matter to me. Naira felt a lump rise in her throat at his words. She had never heard anyone speak like that before, especially not a human. Her people would never say such things, and even when they did, it was always a lie. But Liam's words felt real. They felt like something she could believe in. You don't even know me, Naira whispered, unsure of how to process the weight of his confession. You don't know what I've done, what I am. Liam stepped closer, his hand reaching out to touch her arm gently. I don't need to know everything, he said with a small smile. All I know is that you're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this by yourself. For the first time in days, Naira let herself believe him. She wasn't sure what it all meant yet, but she allowed herself to feel the comfort of his words. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. They continued on, both of them aware that their journey was far from over. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Naira felt a flicker of hope. And it was because of Liam, the human soldier who had chosen to stand by her when no one else would. Liam and Mira had been moving for hours, navigating through dense forests and rocky terrain. The world around them seemed to close in, with dark skies overhead and a thick fog rolling in. The air was damp, and the chill of the night settled deep into their bones. Both of them were running on empty, Naira from pain and exhaustion, and Liam from the weight of his choices. They couldn't stop, though. Not yet. The sound of distant explosions echoed in the night, a reminder that the war was still raging on in the rest of the galaxy. But here, in this quiet corner of the planet, it was just the two of them. And yet it felt like an eternity. Naira's body had begun to falter. Her steps grew slower, her breathing more labored. She was barely holding on, and the thought of collapsing was becoming more real with each passing minute. We need to rest, Naira said quietly, her voice weak. Liam glanced at her, his heart aching at the sight of her struggle. He had seen her at her best, strong, determined, but now she was barely able to keep up. Every time she stumbled, it felt like a heavy blow to him. He wanted to help, to carry her, but he knew that would only make things worse. They had to keep moving. They had to stay ahead of the danger. I know, Liam replied, his voice strained. But not yet. We have to keep going, just a little further. Naira's eyes narrowed, a flicker of defiance crossing her face. We're not going to make it if you keep pushing me like this. Liam. Liam didn't answer right away. He wanted to say something to reassure her, to tell her that they were almost there, but deep down, he knew it wasn't true. They were in the middle of nowhere, and the nearest safe zone was miles away. The more they pushed forward, the more they risked running out of time, running out of options. Suddenly, a sharp noise pierced the air, a low hum followed by the sound of fast-moving engines. Liam's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the sound. It was a ship, but not just any ship. He recognized the markings. The human military. He didn't have to think twice. He knew what this meant. They're coming for us, Liam said under his breath, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. The military had orders to retrieve him, but they wouldn't care about Naira. She was still considered an enemy. Liam, what are you going to do? Naira asked, her voice full of panic. She could see the tension in his face. He was torn between two worlds now, his duty as a soldier and the promise he had made to her. I can't let them take you, Liam said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. I'll find a way to get you to safety, but we need to make a decision. Now. Naira's eyes filled with fear. She didn't want to run anymore. She was exhausted, and she knew there were only so many places they could hide. But she could see it in Liam's eyes. He wasn't going to give up on her. Take me away, Liam, she said softly. Wherever we need to go. I trust you. His heart swelled with a mixture of relief and pain. He had no idea what lay ahead. He had no idea what kind of danger he was walking into. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to abandon her. Not now. Not ever. I won't let them take you, Liam promised again, his voice thick with emotion. With one last glance at the approaching ship, Liam took Naira's hand, leading her toward the forest. They had made their choice, and now, all they could do was run. Liam and Naira ran through the dense forest, their breath coming in sharp gasps. The sound of the military ship's engines grew louder, echoing in the night as it flew overhead. The trees seemed to stretch on forever, but the reality of their situation was clear. They were running out of time. They had to find somewhere safe, somewhere the soldiers wouldn't be able to track them. Naira stumbled, her legs weak from the journey. She could feel the pain in every step, and she knew she couldn't keep running like this for much longer. She wanted to rest, to stop for even a few minutes, but the urgency in Liam's eyes told her that there was no time for that. Liam, we need to stop, she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, but she pushed it aside. There was no place for weakness right now. Liam didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the surroundings. They were deep in the forest now, but the sound of the ship was still in the air, closing in. He could feel the weight of his choices pressing on him. He had taken a risk by disobeying orders to help Naira, and now it felt like the world was closing in on them. I know, Liam replied, his voice tight. Just a little further. But Naira's body was beginning to fail her, her vision blurred, and she could feel herself growing weaker with every step. She didn't want to be a burden to him, but it was becoming clear that she couldn't keep up much longer. I'm sorry, Liam, Naira whispered, her voice full of regret. I never wanted to drag you into this. I never wanted you to be part of my fight. Liam stopped and turned to face her, his expression softening. He took her arm gently, steadying her. You didn't drag me into anything, he said firmly. I chose this. I chose to help you. You're not alone anymore, Naira. For a moment, Naira just looked at him, her heart aching with emotion. She had been abandoned by everyone, her people, her friends, even the world she had once known. But in Liam's words, she found something she had lost a long time ago. Hope. We can't stop here, Liam said, but there was a gentleness in his voice now. "We need to keep moving, just a little longer. Then we'll find somewhere safe. I promise." Naira nodded, though her body screamed for rest. With Liam's support, she managed to push forward. They kept moving, though every step felt like it might be her last. The ship was still overhead, and they both knew that time was running out. Suddenly, through the thick trees ahead, they spotted something. An old, abandoned building, barely visible in the shadows of the forest. It looked like a safe place to hide, a place where they could regroup and rest. But they both knew they couldn't stay there for long. The military was still out there, searching for them. "We need to get inside," Liam said, his voice low but determined. "It's our only shot." They moved quickly toward the building, and as they reached the entrance, Liam glanced around to make sure they hadn't been followed. For a moment, they were safe. Inside, the building was cold and dark. It was a forgotten place, long abandoned, but it offered the shelter they needed. Liam helped Naira to the floor, her legs finally giving out from exhaustion. He sat beside her, his mind racing with everything that had happened, everything that could happen next. "We're not out of danger yet," Liam said quietly, looking at Naira with a deep sense of urgency. "But we're safe for now. We'll figure this out, together." Naira looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never thought she would find someone like him. Someone who cared enough to risk everything for her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. They had made it this far, and maybe, just maybe, they could make it through whatever came next. The old building was quiet now, the only sound the soft rustling of wind outside and the occasional drip of water leaking through the roof. Liam sat against the wall, his eyes scanning the shadows, ever watchful. The night had been long, and though they had found temporary shelter, they both knew they couldn't stay here forever. But for now, they needed the rest. Naira leaned back against the crumbling wall, her eyes closed as she tried to gather whatever strength she had left. She could still feel the weight of her exhaustion pressing down on her, but something had shifted inside her. The fear that had been gnawing at her every moment for days was starting to fade. Liam had stayed by her side, never wavering. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Liam had been right. She hadn't dragged him into this. He had made his own choice, and he was sticking by her, even though every decision they made was filled with danger. "I never thought I'd end up like this," Naira said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost distant as she spoke more to herself than to Liam. "I always believed I would die with my people. But now I don't know what I believe anymore." Liam glanced at her, his expression soft but serious. "You're not going to die here, Naira. You're going to survive. We're going to get through this." Naira gave him a small, weary smile, her eyes meeting his. There was a quiet comfort in his words, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the relief of it. She had been running for so long, unsure of what the future held. But now, with Liam beside her, she felt a tiny spark of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "You really think so?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know so," Liam replied firmly. He stood and walked over to her, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. "We just have to keep moving. No matter what happens, we'll keep moving. Together." The sincerity in his voice made Naira's heart ache. She had never had anyone look at her like that, like she mattered. She had always been a warrior, a tool for a war she had no control over. But here, now with Liam, she felt like more than just an alien caught in a battle. She felt like a person again. "I don't deserve this," Naira said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I've done things, terrible things. My people, they abandoned me for a reason. I failed them." Liam shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to answer for what they did, Naira. You're not them. You're you. And right now, you're my responsibility. And I won't let anything happen to you." Naira looked at him, disbelief in her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever cared enough to stay, to fight for her. It made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. "I don't know how to trust anyone anymore," Naira admitted softly, her voice full of pain. "I don't know how to trust you." Liam sat down next to her, his presence steady and calm. "I get it. Trust isn't easy, but you don't have to trust me all at once. Just take it one step at a time. We'll rebuild it together." Naira nodded slowly, a faint hope rising in her chest. She wasn't ready to let go of all her doubts just yet, but Liam's words made her feel like maybe, just maybe, it was worth trying. The two of them sat in the quiet, the night stretching on as they began to rebuild what had been broken. Trust, hope, a future that, for the first time, seemed like it was possible. The dawn broke slowly, casting a pale light over the abandoned building. The world outside was quiet, the dangerous noise of the military ship now gone, leaving only the soft hum of the wind through the trees. Liam and Naira had spent the night in uneasy sleep, both too aware of the dangers still lurking, but somehow the feeling of being together offered them a fragile peace. Liam was the first to stir. His eyes opened slowly, scanning the room. Everything was still. The shadows seemed to stretch longer in the morning light, but the silence was a welcome change. He stood up quietly, not wanting to disturb Naira, who was still resting against the wall, her breath steady, but her body clearly exhausted. He felt the weight of the decision ahead. They couldn't stay here forever. The military was still searching for them. They had to move, find a safer place, or they'd be caught. But there was something else weighing on his mind. Naira had come to mean more to him than he could explain, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. He turned his gaze back to her, watching her for a moment. Her features were soft in the dim light, a stark contrast to the hardened warrior she had once been. For the first time, Naira looked vulnerable, like she was just a person, someone who deserved a chance at something better. "Naira," Liam said quietly, his voice low but filled with urgency. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him, her tired gaze slowly clearing. She smiled faintly, a small, uncertain smile, but it was there. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam crouched down next to her, his face serious. "We need to go. It's not safe here anymore. We have to keep moving." Naira nodded slowly, pushing herself to her feet. Her legs wobbled slightly, but she steadied herself with Liam's help. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said everything. She trusted him. She would keep moving, even if it felt impossible. As they stepped outside the shelter, the cool morning air hit them both, and Liam took a deep breath. The forest stretched out before them, quiet but full of hidden dangers. But Liam wasn't worried about that. For the first time in a long time, he felt like they had a chance. "Where do we go from here?" Naira asked, her voice a bit more steady now. Liam looked out at the horizon, thinking about their options. He knew there were places they could go, places where they might find some semblance of safety. But none of it mattered. What mattered now was that they were in this together. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we'll figure it out. Together." The two of them walked side by side, the weight of the world on their shoulders. But there was something else too. Hope. The kind of hope that comes when you stop running and face the future with someone by your side. Liam had made a choice. He had defied everything. His mission, his orders, even his own doubts, for Naira. And now, they were both free. As they moved deeper into the forest, their path uncertain, one thing was clear. No matter what the future held, they would face it together. The odds were against them, but for the first time, they didn't feel like they were running away from something. They were running toward something. And for once, that was enough.